Ever feel like you just need a shortcut to really understanding something complex, without having to wade through a ton of articles and research?
Well, that's what we're doing today. We've done all that for you. Welcome to this deep dive. What we're going to doing is a really focused exploration that we've created just for you. And we're zeroing in on how experiential learning is being adapted for the online world, specifically asynchronous education. And what this adaptation reveals about how we humans resist change. This move to online learning, we all saw it, right? Especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. It really accelerated.
Yeah, absolutely. And for this deep dive, we're looking at a really interesting study. It's called Experiential Learning in Online Education, an exercise in resistance to change. And it
Yeah.
was written by Amal Alasri Ajiberi and Eva Rimbo Gilibert and published in the journal Campus Virtualis in 2025. And what makes the study especially relevant is that it examines a real-world application in an online MBA program. Perfect. So our goals today are twofold. First, we want to understand the creative and innovative ways educators are incorporating hands-on learning in the online space. And second, we want to see what these adaptations can teach us about our natural reactions to change. So first off, let's clarify something. What exactly is experiential learning in this context?
Well, at its core, experiential learning really emphasizes that learning is most effective when it comes from actually doing something. The study draws on Kolb's learning cycle, which is really well known. You have a concrete experience, and then you reflect on that experience. And this reflection leads to the formation of abstract concepts. And then you actively test those concepts through experimentation. So it's this ongoing process of learning by doing and reflecting.
So it's not just about checking a box and completing the task, but it's more about actively thinking about what happened and what you learned. The study also mentions a few advantages of this approach, especially when it comes to developing soft skills.
Yeah, exactly. Research shows that experiential learning is really great for helping university students develop those soft skills. The study references Hoyan Chung and Jonathan Lake. They both emphasize this benefit. And for business education, it's really valuable for connecting theoretical knowledge with practical application. Yorio and Ye talk about that a lot. There's even some evidence from Knopfler and his colleagues suggesting that experiential learning can help people build confidence in things like entrepreneurship. And some researchers like Swenin even propose that this approach is becoming the new normal in education after the pandemic.
The new normal. That sounds like a really significant change. With so much education moving online, how do you translate something as hands-on as experiential learning into a digital environment? This is where the concept of experiential e-learning comes in, right?
Right. Experiential e-learning is about intentionally integrating these core principles of experiential learning into online settings. The study cites a bunch of researchers like Basanjov, Carver and his colleagues, Columbari and his colleagues, and Victorini and his colleagues. They're all exploring different aspects of how to create these hands-on professional experiences online. The quick shift to online learning during the pandemic really forced the need for innovation in this area.
And this leads us to asynchronous learning, which is something we hear a lot about these days. Can you explain what that means and why it's particularly relevant to this discussion about online experiential learning?
So asynchronous learning just means that students can access materials and activities at different times. Not everyone needs to be online at the same time. Kailar and Herstinsky are the big names in this area. This type of learning offers a lot of flexibility, which is really important for students who are balancing other things in their lives, like work or family.
Yeah, it makes sense. Learning that can fit into your schedule. The study also mentions a few specific benefits of asynchronous learning for experiential learning.
Yeah, it can actually help create a deeper understanding of the material and improve how much students retain. Bahaya and Hostinsky talk about that. By letting learners work at their own pace, it can also help reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed, cognitive overload. Basanja really emphasizes this point. And asynchronous learning can also create opportunities for students who maybe can't easily access traditional in-person experiential learning. Marble, Fulcher, and Terman bring that up. Think about students in remote areas or students who have financial limitations.
So it expands access in important ways, but I imagine there must be some challenges in moving interactive learning to an asynchronous format. I mean, you lose that immediate back and forth.
Oh, definitely. One challenge is the feeling of isolation. Some learners might feel isolated, but Basanjov says asynchronous communication tools can help mitigate that. Those tools let students have discussions and collaborate, even if it's not in real time. For educators, though, the main challenges are around instructional design. They really have to rethink how to adapt dynamic in-person activities to an online setting. Carver and his colleagues in Herstinsky both emphasize this point, And from the student's perspective, it can be harder to manage your time effectively in an asynchronous environment. Ma and his colleagues talk about that a lot.
So it requires a different set of skills for both educators and students. Now, the study we're looking at today really dives into a specific example of how educators approach this. They have a case study that focuses on simulating the experience of resistance to change in an online setting.
Yeah, this is where we see all these ideas put into practice. It's really insightful. The researchers took an in-person activity that was originally developed by Bridgman that simulates organizational restructuring, and they adapted it for online learning. This adaptation was used in an online MBA Change Management course at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya.
So the traditional activity often involves physically moving participants around to represent changes. How did they recreate that feeling of disruption and evoke the same feelings in an asynchronous online course?
The basic strategy was to have the students experience the frustration and uncertainty of organizational change firsthand. They were working on a change management case study for their grade. The researchers had them present similar information multiple times, but each time they had to use a different online tool. These tools included things like forums, discussion boards, microblogs with a very short character limit, Google Slides, and even video submissions.
That sounds like it was designed to be disruptive, so the students weren't just learning about resistance to change, but actually encountering it in their learning process. And these changes and tools were introduced over time.
Exactly. The changes were rolled out sequentially. To capture their reactions, the students kept learning journals that their peers and the faculty could access. This gave them a space to think about their learning process, and it let the instructors see how these tech changes were affecting the students.
So it was a way to get a first-hand look at their experiences. The study mentions a specific sequence of events in the workshop. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. It started with an announcement on the virtual classroom board. It let students know about the upcoming workshop and that they needed to participate every day. And before the activity even started, the students had to fill out a questionnaire about their initial beliefs about resistance to change. The first task was answering some case study questions in a forum. This was their first concrete experience from Kolb's cycle. They also wrote their individual thoughts and reflections in their learning journals throughout this process. That was the start of the reflective observation phase. Next, they had to answer the same questions on the discussion board, another concrete experience but with a different tool. Then came the microblog with a 125-character limit, another concrete experience and probably a source of frustration for a lot of students. Then they had to create shared slides on Google Slides. The reason given for the change was that the microblog limit was hindering their reflections. And finally, they had to make a video about the case study. They were told that this marked the start of phase 2 of the workshop. After all those changes, there was another announcement. This one revealed that all the changes had been intentional. They were supposed to make the students experience resistance to change themselves. Then the students share their insights with the group and apply their learnings to the case study. And this is the abstract conceptualization and active experimentation stages from Kolb's cycle. Workshop ended with a live video conference debriefing, and the students filled out that questionnaire about resistance to change one more time.
Wow. It sounds like the students were really put through the ringer that week. Constantly switching platforms like that would definitely make me feel some type of way. What did the students actually experience? The study looked at their reflections, right?
Yeah, the researchers did a qualitative analysis of 24 reflective essays from the class forum. It's really interesting how much their experiences mirrored Kolb's learning cycle. In that initial concrete experience phase, a lot of students said they were actually excited at first. They saw the different tools as a challenge or like a game. But that changed pretty quickly and turned into confusion and disorientation. They felt like they were wasting time learning how to use all the new platforms. But it's interesting that they didn't really complain openly at this point.
That's an important observation. The students not being open about their frustrations. The study tries to explain why that happened.
It does. A few students mentioned feeling insecure about all the changes. They were worried that if they complained, there might be negative consequences. One student even compared it to their workplace. They said, just like at work. There was a desire to ask why they were doing this experiment. But the students hesitated because they didn't want to directly challenge authority. Some of them even admitted to using WhatsApp to vent to each other instead of using the official feedback channels.
So just like in real-world organizations, people were talking about their concerns privately but not formally. What about the reflective observation stage? What did the students learn from having to constantly adapt to new tools?
One big takeaway was that it's important to express your feelings and concerns during times of change. They realized that keeping their frustration bottled up wasn't helpful. They also gained a deeper understanding of how important clear communication and planning are when implementing change. It minimizes resistance. Some students even reflected on their own behavior. They noticed that they tended to use informal channels to communicate instead of the official feedback tools. And they started to understand the importance of listening to and using feedback during change.
So they were connecting their personal experience to the principles of change management. How did they make that jump to the abstract conceptualization phase where they start forming conclusions?
Well, this is where they started to grasp the bigger picture. They realized the goal wasn't just to analyze the case study, but to experience the dynamics of change for themselves. They understood that the activity was testing their ability to adapt, follow instructions when things were uncertain, and tolerate ambiguity. One student said, "The case study provided the context, but the real case was us."
Wow. They became the subject of their own learning. And finally, the active experimentation phase. How did this experience change how they might approach implementing or experiencing change in the future?
They said they developed more empathy for colleagues who resist change. They were less likely to take it personally. They also said they wanted to focus on better communication during change. They wanted to understand the impact of change on individuals. And some of them even suggested forming specific project teams to manage change.
So navigating this difficult experience actually gave them some useful insights into managing change. The study also collected quantitative data through those questionnaires they gave before and after the workshop. What did those results say about changes in their beliefs about resistance to change?
Right, so they used a questionnaire based on Org scale from 2003, but they adapted it to focus on beliefs about other people's resistance to change. They look at four main areas: routine seeking, emotional reaction, short-term focus, and cognitive rigidity. Routine seeking is about preferring to do things the way they've always been done. Emotional reaction is about feeling stressed or upset by change. Short-term focus is about worrying about the immediate inconveniences of change. And cognitive rigidity is about being unwilling to consider new ideas. And they added a fifth dimension: the belief that resistance to change is harmful to organizations. Only 12 students finished both questionnaires, though, so the researchers looked at percentage changes instead of statistical significance.
Okay, so what were some of the biggest changes in their beliefs after the workshop?
Well, there were increases across a few dimensions. There was a 17.5% increase in the belief that people generally like routines, and there was a 16.9% increase in the belief that people tend to focus on the short-term inconveniences of change. There was also a 13% increase in the belief that people are reluctant to consider new ideas, and there was a smaller 4.7% increase in the belief that people get stressed by change. But maybe the most interesting finding was that there was a 5.2% decrease in the belief that resisting change is bad for organizations.
That's really interesting. So the students learn more about the common ways that people resist change, but they also started to see that resistance as less negative. That's a subtle but really important shift.
Yeah. The workshops seemed to help them understand that resistance is a pretty normal and natural human response to change. It's not just something bad that needs to be eliminated.
So to sum up, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into asynchronous experiential learning and resistance to change? What should our listeners take away from this?
First, it clearly shows that experiential learning can happen outside of a traditional classroom. Even in asynchronous online settings, you can design activities that really help students understand complex topics like resistance to change. And this study proves that you don't need fancy tech to do this. The researchers use basic tools that most online learning platforms have. It highlights that careful planning and a solid teaching approach are the most important things.
That's good to know. Innovation doesn't always require buying the most expensive new technology.
Right, and if you think about the students in the study and what they went through, the confusion, the frustration with the changing tools, the hesitation to speak up, these are all things that happen in real organizations all the time. So this study helps us think about similar situations that we've been in or might be in the future. And maybe the biggest takeaway is this change in perspective on resistance. If we can understand that resistance is a normal human thing, we can be more empathetic and come up with better ways to manage change.
That's a great point. It's about understanding that change is about people.
Exactly. By intentionally creating an experience of change, even if it's in a learning setting, we can get a better understanding of these complex human reactions. And then instead of seeing resistance as a roadblock, we can see it as a normal part of the process.
Well, this deep dive into experiential learning has definitely shown us a new way to look at how we react to change. We've seen that even online, in an asynchronous environment, a well-designed experience can lead to some profound learning and completely change how we think about things like resistance. It's amazing to see that experiencing something firsthand, even if it's just frustration with technology, can lead to these valuable insights.
What's really remarkable is how something as seemingly simple as making students switch between online tools resulted in such rich qualitative data, and it actually changed how they viewed a key aspect of organizational behavior.
So now that you've seen how experiencing change can completely change someone's understanding, think about this. How could you create little experiential moments in your own life? How could you use these moments to help the people around you better understand and deal with the changes that are always happening at work and in life? This deep dive has shown us just how powerful experiential learning can be. So we encourage you to think about how these principles might apply to your own learning. And think about how you approach making changes and dealing with changes in your own life.